that was the big shift for boundaries, was I came to care more what I think of me than what other people do. And it doesn't mean I don't care at all what other people think. Of course I do. But I don't with claws need your approval the way that I used to. I want your approval, but I don't need it because I have my own, because I'm authentic and living in alignment with my values. I'm not lying. I'm an honest woman of integrity. And if me being in integrity is going to make me lose you, I don't want that to happen, but I'd rather be in integrity.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand. Have you ever found yourself drowning in yeses when internally you're just screaming, no? Our guest today knows that dance all too well. After 52 years of people-pleasing, therapy, and enough self-help books to fill a library, Barb Nangle finally cracked the code on setting boundaries both personally and professionally. Her specialty is working with professional women who say yes when they really want to say no and are so focused on others that they neglect themselves. If you've experienced this, stay tuned because we're digging into this subject right now.
Barb, welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for this interview. I'm glad to see you guys again.
Yes, good to see you. And what a great subject this is, because I feel like this subject is a very big hindrance to the forward movement of business. And so we're going to dig into that. But before we do that, share a little bit of your personal journey, if you will. What got you to here and working in this space?
Yeah. So when I was 52, I was working full time at Yale University. I had been there at that point. I had been there for 17 years. And I hit a codependent bottom. And in case people don't know what codependent means, I didn't either, even though I had done a lifetime of therapy and other work. So people are like, the classic codependent is someone that's in some kind of a relationship with an addict or an alcoholic. So maybe they're the parent of an adult addict or an alcoholic, or they're the romantic partner. And there's typically really focused on that which is outside themselves. So what is he doing? What is she doing? What do they need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need? And I landed in 12-step recovery, initially Codependence Anonymous, then eventually adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, which I didn't know I qualified for. That is actually a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. I didn't know that I qualified. I didn't know I had trauma, none of that. And then I'm also in Overeaters Anonymous. I am down over 100 pounds from my top weight. So I'm an abstinent compulsive overeater. And one of the many, many, many gifts and tools I received from the process of 12-step recovery was learning how to build healthy boundaries. And it's not like someone sat me down and was like, okay, let's build boundaries. It was just sort of, I built them through this meandering haphazard process. And because I think of codependence as my core wound, which is really the result of trauma, and explains why I drank so heavily, smoked so much weed, and got into the food, because I was trying to numb my system. That boundaries are essentially the antidote to codependence. So after about 2 to 3 years in recovery, and I had a pretty good handle on boundaries, I started reading about them because I was like, this is amazing. And as I was doing the reading, I would draw these images that visually depicted what I was understanding the boundaries to, quote, look like. Well, those drawings turned into handouts, which turned into a workbook, which is the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. So what I've done is created an accelerated method by which people can learn how to build healthy boundaries in a matter of weeks through a very structured process and coaching with me, rather than this meandering haphazard path like I took through the 12 steps of recovery. And because I was a professional woman and I saw the ripple effect of me alone building boundaries on my team and on my project, I was like, wow, I want to coach former me. So as you mentioned at the beginning, my goal is to work with professional women who say yes when they really want to say no, and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others, because the transformation for me has been absolutely astonishing. And one of the things that people enjoy hearing about the most in regard to the benefits of my boundaries is that I'm now in the first and only healthy romantic relationship of my life. So I've never been married. I've never had kids, but I literally had dozens of dysfunctional relationships. And I've been with my sweetheart for over 6 years now. And I know who I am. I know what's okay with me and what's not okay. And I know how to communicate that. And he is the same. So that's my micro version of my story.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack, and I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. You know, it's probably no surprise to a lot of the people listening to us right now. I come from a background of a lot of addiction throughout my family on both sides. Skipped over me, thank God, but it definitely hit a lot of my family members. And so I'm familiar, vaguely, not intimately, but familiar with the 12-step program, how much amazing good that has done for people all over the world. And I know you said I don't actually teach the 12-step program, but a lot of the things that you now teach and you help to solve your own issues with came from that 12-step program, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And the way that I think of all those, let's say 37 years of personal development before recovery, is I started therapy at 15. And then I got introduced to the whole self-help genre at like 22 or something, read a gajillion, like all the things. All of that stuff scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery melted the iceberg of my life. And the major things that came out in my first 2 to 3 years of recovery, like that I had victim mentality, that I had no boundaries, that I had trauma, that I was codependent, that I lied all the time, that I was a people pleaser, that I had wildly unrealistic expectations. I could go on. None of those things ever came up in therapy, in the groups that I did, the books that I read. This is why I started my podcast. It's called Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. And I started it with the express purpose of getting all this wisdom and recovery out to the world. So I started it in March of 2019. I've recorded 291 episodes weekly. And it's funny, in the beginning, I thought I should probably do this every other week because I don't know if I'm going to have enough content. And I continue to learn and grow. I do lots of other things too. I'm not exclusively 12 steps, but I think there's just so much wisdom. I heard somebody recently call the 12 steps a technology. And I was like, ooh, I like that term. It's a technology for growth and healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is really interesting to me for a lot of different reasons. I too, I mean, I don't think there's a family on earth that's untouched by some kind of addiction, codependency, and problems that just continues to perpetuate. But, I'm also big on, one of the things I say is you can't calculate the cost of confusion. And it sounds to me like you really help with a lot of clarification for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I love that you said the word confusion, because so in the ACA Adult Children of Alcoholics program, they have the same exact 12 steps as all other 12 steps, but they also have an alternate version that's called Tony A's 12 steps. He was the founder of the program. And in his second step, he says, we will be restored to clarity, whereas other 12 steps say we will be restored to sanity. And the farther I get into my recovery, and I've been in recovery for 9.5 years now, the more I realized I was confused my entire life, but I didn't know it. So I thought I had clarity and I didn't. So I was confused about what's normal and what's not, what's traumatic and what's not, what's okay with me and what's not okay, what my role is, what my boundaries were, what boundaries were. I mean, so many things. And I just didn't know it. So I continue to be restored to clarity, not quite on a daily basis, but definitely on a weekly basis, because I was so immersed in the dysfunction of my family. And I want to say something about that. So ACA is a trauma recovery program, because addiction is a family disease, as you've alluded to, and B, trauma results from intergenerational family dysfunction. And for most people in ACA, it's what we call little t trauma or relational trauma. It's not like the blunt trauma that happens when you're in a war or you've been attacked or you're in a hurricane or something like that. That's sometimes called big T trauma. So what it means is it's the result of things like emotional abandonment, emotional invalidation, neglect. Sometimes it's actual like physical abandonment. I've actually just had an insight this past weekend, which is crazy, that my big issue with my father was that he abandoned my family when he opened his pharmacy when I was 8. He literally started working 7 days a week for years. And I've worked a lot and I've cleaned up a lot of my resentment against him, but I can't believe that never came up before, that's the core issue for me. So that kind of thing results in trauma, which is when I heard someone say that trauma can result from the absence of good things happening, I was like, oh, okay. Because before that, I was like, trauma? I don't know. But the absence of good things, or sometimes people say unmet needs. So,
That's good.
One of the effects of that is no boundaries.
Like what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button and learn how you can change how you're seen and charge what you're worth.
Yeah. Okay. So I was just about to say, how does that necessarily in those situations affect somebody's acumen or attitude or personality in the workplace? And you just answered that question, but would you please elaborate on that just a little bit? Because I want to shift focus back over for just a moment, because there are so many women in the workplace that we are saying yes, 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 when we mean to say no. Talk just a moment about that, Barb.
Yeah. So I think talking about people pleasing, to be specific, is a good illustration of how the trauma results in no boundaries. So when you're little and you're living in this environment with big people who, like, you're going to die if you don't placate them, you do whatever you have to do to get them to be pleased with you. So that means you will lie and you will manipulate, which is, I didn't know that I was a people pleaser. I didn't know that saying yes when I really wanted to say no was lying. I did a lot of lying about other things too, but my main line was in people pleasing. And I didn't understand that my goal of getting people to like me or to approve of me, that's called manipulation. And when I first learned that, I was like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. I'm not a horrible person. I'm a wounded person. I didn't understand. Now that I know better and I do better, as Maya Angelou says.
Love it.
Right. But I didn't understand any of that. When I first heard the term people pleasing, I didn't think it applied to me. Oh my God, I was such a people pleaser. So there's clarity for me, right? There's a piece of clarity that people pleasing is a thing. It's manipulative and dishonest, and I'm that. Those all were just news to me.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I don't want to be offensive here, but it really starts with a lot of responsibility of yourself, right? Like, you have to recognize, and I like what you said, it doesn't make you a bad person. Like, nobody's unredeemable, right? There's no such thing as trash human beings, right? We are all just missing the mark, right? And I think we all have something to work on. I know I do a lot of that. So how does that work to the negative in the workplace? Is it give us some examples of that?
Well, I want to first say how it works to your benefit, because a people pleaser and a codependent makes a really good employee, because I was conscientious. I took initiative. I went above and beyond the call of duty. And so I was a highly valued employee. Everywhere I went, I was one of like 95% of the workers, every kind of industry I ever worked in, because, that was me, like, people please, people please, people please. And that's good for the organization and for the employer, but it kills you for, as a person, and you're not really living your authentic life, and you get burnt out and you get resentful and you neglect yourself. And it's just simply unsustainable. I tend to work with older women, so women above 50 that have gotten to the point where, like, I can't. And I work with some pretty high-powered women too, who we look like we have it together on the outside, and we do in some respects. But meanwhile, they go from the boardroom to the bathroom to cry. So because they can't hold it together, because they're faking it so much, and they're just completely worn down. And then if they're moms and their wives, on top of being, having these really responsible jobs, then the weight is even more. And they just basically, I think of it as like they take the hit for everybody around them, and it's just not sustainable. And so, like, one of the many things that I teach my clients is to fill your cup first. So instead of trying to pour from an empty cup, pour from the overflow. So the only way you have overflow is if you take care of yourself first. However, we have to battle the myth that it is somehow selfish to take care of yourself. And selfish is like an epithet to women. It doesn't seem like it has that effect on men. I don't really hear men talking about that. I do hang out with a lot more women than men. But I had a client who actually said to me, I would rather be called a whore than selfish. Like, what is going on in this world that somebody says something like that? And the thing is, selfish is not the worst thing in the world. And it is not selfish to take care of yourself. This is why when you fly in an airplane and they say, hey, if the oxygen mask comes down and you're caring for someone else, put it on you first, because if you're passed out, you can't help them.
No help.
If your cup is empty, you can't help other people. And if you're a mom and you're doing this, you're modeling for children. I'm expendable. And when you grow up, you're going to be expendable too, or your wife is going to be expendable too. And that's just not like, do we really want to teach that to our children?
No,
I think not.
Yeah, I've always said that selfish is not delineating how you want to live and living that way. Selfish is forcing other people to live that way.
Yes, that's a really good distinction. Yes.
Yeah,
having healthy boundaries is deciding how you want to live, living that way, and then getting people on board or not, because some people are not going to get on board. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to let people go. In my case, I never had any like conversations like you're out. People just sort of faded away.
Right.
Because I was just not toeing the line the way that I was before. I was not doing all the work in the relationships that I used to before. And they clearly needed me to do all the work, and I wasn't willing to anymore.
And do you find too that that's also a limiting belief of pleasers too? I mean, it's sort of like too, sometimes, when you got that talker and you're like, oh, I just couldn't interrupt them. I've always found that if you do, hey, I'm really busy, sorry to cut you off, they're never offended. Like
right. Agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost like too, I find that maybe it's a limiting belief if you're a pleaser, that people are just going to not like you when you stop pleasing and when you're clear about your boundaries. And usually they're cool with it. They didn't know that was your boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like my first module is about mindset, because mindset is important for everything. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but there's particular things that have to do with mindset around boundaries that I teach. But I think what's underneath of not wanting to interrupt them and thinking that you're going to piss them off is that we have this profound and deep focus outside ourselves on other people. So we care way more what they think of us than what we think of us. We don't even I never even considered, what do I think of me? I was like, what do I need to do to get their approval? And what the big shift for me that caused me to go from caring way more what other people think about me to caring more what I think of me is that that was the big shift for boundaries, was I came to care more what I think of me than what other people do. And it doesn't mean I don't care at all what other people think. Of course I do. But I don't with claws need your approval the way that I used to. I want your approval, but I don't need it because I have my own, because I'm authentic and living in alignment with my values. I'm not lying. I'm an honest woman of integrity. And if me being in integrity is going to make me lose you, I don't want that to happen, but I'd rather be in integrity than have you in my life, if that's the choice that I have to make.
Sure.
Yeah, it's that peace element. And at the heart of all of us, we want a peaceful life, right?
Yeah.
We don't want a life of confusion and chaos. We just want a life of peace. So if somebody came to you and said, hey, Barb, I know I have some serious boundary issues, what's the first thing you would do with them?
The first thing I would do is some mindset work, because they're so, and usually as they beat themselves up. So one of my favorite tips that I learned in 12-step recovery is this phrase, info, not ammo. So when you learn something about yourself that you don't particularly like, it's information for you to learn, integrate, and grow from. It is not ammunition to beat yourself up. So in other words, we go from self-judgment to curiosity. And what I love about curiosity is that it is neutral. And I also encourage people to think info, not ammo, about others. So if you have a particular dynamic with someone that's been going on for years, instead of going, here we go, the next time they come along, think, okay, this is info, not ammo. What do I make of this situation? And the best intervention is for you to change something about the dynamics of your end of the interaction. This is where boundaries come in. You start making decisions. This way of interacting isn't working for me. I can't control their end of the dynamic, but I can control my end. So what am I going to do about it? And when we come at things with curiosity, we're much more likely to be solution oriented than problem focused.
I love it. What a great takeaway.
Very eloquent. I love it too. Gosh, Barb, I wish we had a lot more time with you today. So we're just going to have you back. So,
oh, goody.
We'd love that. We would love that. So if you don't mind, Barb, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, because I know there are so many people out there who struggle with this issue, both in their personal and professional lives. And I'm sure you probably agree that if they struggle in one, they probably struggle in both. Right?
Probably. Not always, but probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you think that you might like to work with me, you can sign up for a 30-minute Better Boundaries call, which is where we basically find out, are we a good fit? You go to barbchat.net, and that's the link to my calendar right there. And then since you're already listening to a podcast, you might want to hop on over to mine on whatever podcast outlet, or go to fragmentedtowhole.com, and you will be able to get to my podcast from there.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome. We'll make sure those links are also in the show notes.
Thank you so much, Barb, for coming here with us today. I love this topic, and you have brought so much enlightenment to it.
Oh, thank you so much. Couldn't wait for this call. So I'm really excited.
Ready to change how you're seen and charge what you're worth? If you're not getting enough opportunities to meet with ideal customers, or the prospects you're meeting with just aren't ideal, it's most likely your brand that's holding you back. So if you're a coach, consultant, or expert who is on the rise, you need our ultimate guide to a freedom-based brand. Download it free now at BrandFaceGuide.com.